Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Heritage Foundation Vice President, Dr. Kim Holmes.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure to see all of you again. I was here to not only introduce Tommy Binion, our new Vice President for Congressional Relations, but also to welcome all of you back to the start of another very exciting day of programming and speeches and briefings from the Heritage Foundation. I cannot tell you how happy I am to be able to not only make acquaintance with some old friends that I haven't seen for a couple of years, but to make new friends. We gain our energy and our commitment from you, not only from the support that you give the Heritage Foundation, but also from the ideas you have, the encouragement that you give Mrs. James and me. It is absolutely invaluable. I cannot tell you how important it is, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for all you do for us. Now, yesterday, we did big issues. We did themes: identity politics, socialism, reaching out to new audiences. And I look at it as like setting the table for today for a deep dive on policy, starting with the panel here on economic growth. We have some of the best stars from the Heritage Foundation. Steve Moore is with us to talk about economic growth, the economic policies, the tax cuts that are stimulating economic growth. We'll have a discussion of national security, and we'll have other very interesting deep dive discussions as well. But my job here is just to say hello, to welcome all of you, and now to introduce the MC and the chairman of this briefing is Tommy Binion. Now, Tommy has been with us a few years. He is in charge of our congressional and executive branch outreach activities at Heritage. He is in charge of over 400 programs, both for the executive branch and for the Congress. He has extensive experience on the Hill. He's worked for a prominent conservative legislator in the House. He even has worked for Heritage Action for a while. And we are very pleased that on September 28th, the Board of Trustees of the Heritage Foundation approved that Tommy Binion is the new Vice President for Congressional Relations and Government Relations at the Heritage Foundation. So congratulations, Tommy. Now, Tommy is another one of our young leaders. For those of you who came to the Hillwood Estate, and when I introduced Andrew McIndoe, we talked about how Kay and I are consciously trying to reach down and find new, younger leaders, the future leadership of the Heritage Foundation. We try to mentor them, we try to support them, and we listen to them very closely. And Tommy is just one of these new emerging leaders of the conservative movement, and we could not be happier to have him in the senior management team. So without further ado, now turn it over to Tommy, who will now introduce the panelists. And once again, thank all of you for everything you do for Heritage. God bless.
Well, thank you, Dr. Holmes. Let me just take advantage of the opportunity I have on being on this stage to say to all of you from the bottom of my heart, thank you for your support. Your generous support of the Heritage Foundation is motivating and it is humbling, and we do not take it lightly. Sincerely, I almost never have an opportunity to say thank you to this many people. Thank you. We've got a really great panel this morning, and it's a real privilege to be on this panel because it's a bright spot of the last 2 years. It is a good news story. The tax cuts, the roaring economy, the legislative success, everything that we're going to talk about this morning just about is extraordinarily positive. In fact, it would be hard to imagine this panel taking place just 2 short years ago. If on this day 2 years ago, you closed your eyes and said, we're going to be at the Marriott Marquis in October of 2018 talking about a roaring economy, tax cuts that President Trump signed into law, you would have been floored and really, really pleased. I don't think we should take that lightly. This is an extraordinary success story, and at the Heritage Foundation, we're proud to have taken part in it. I like talking about economic growth. I like talking about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It is a validation in 2 ways. One is it's a validation of the things that Heritage does, the outreach that we do, the papers that we write, the analysis that we produce, the work that we do on Capitol Hill and in the executive branch. It's a validation that those efforts work, that they can lead to a big success like the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. But more importantly, the story that we're going to tell you this morning is proof that small government, economic freedom, those policies work. They will produce economic growth. Tax cuts, as it turns out, are the engine of this economy. The policies that we're recommending absolutely produce the desired effects. I'm just going to talk about 3 quick events that Heritage put on that led to this success story. When I'm done telling that story, I'm going to introduce these great panelists. We've got Norbert Michel, Steve Moore, and Adam Michel here to talk about some great things. I'm going to go through their bio in just a minute. But I want to tell you a story about the Heritage Foundation's interaction with the Congress, with the executive branch, with President Trump. Steve Moore, he's on the road 5 times a week and has been for years. He was an integral part of advising both the Trump campaign and the Trump administration on these tax cuts. You all, the supporters of the Heritage Foundation, have a lot to be proud of in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. 3 key leaders in this story are Chairman Kevin Brady, the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, the author of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, Speaker Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, who pushed these through, and of course, President Donald Trump, who we have to thank for these tax cuts. All 3 of these men came to Heritage, came to us, to speak to us about tax reform, to help this effort get off the ground. Starting with Kevin Brady. Kevin Brady, in February of 2017, his office called us up and they said, Chairman Brady would like to come to the Conservative Members Conference. You all know about the Conservative Members Conference. Every year, the Heritage Foundation hosts the conservative members of the House of Representatives. We go somewhere off-site, somewhere 100, 200 miles away, and we have the members' attention for 3 days. And we do it in January or February on purpose, so we can plan out the legislative landscape for that year. 2017 was no different. We went to New York City, and we gave Kevin Brady the floor for nearly 2 hours to talk about his vision for tax reform. And what he really did there, he talked about his vision for tax reform. He talked about the moving pieces. He talked about how it would have to be done on reconciliation. He talked about the limitations of that, all of those types of things. But what he was really doing on that stage was convincing the members in the audience that tax reform could be a reality. At that time, we were in the midst of Obamacare repeal. It was floundering. There was not a whole lot of optimism about the legislative agenda. And what Kevin Brady did in a discussion with members of Congress are very busy. They do not have very often 2 hours to sit and discuss with one another one particular topic. And we gave them that opportunity. I think Kevin Brady, his appearance at the Conservative Members Conference in New York in 2017 had a lot to do with the success of tax reform. The next big event I want to talk to you about is Speaker Paul Ryan's appearance at the Heritage Foundation. He wanted to speak at Heritage. He spoke in the Allison Auditorium on the 7th floor of the building there at 214 Massachusetts Avenue about tax reform. This was October 12th. Obamacare had recently, the repeal effort had recently failed, and the Congress had turned its attention. Actually, Paul Ryan sort of turned the Congress's attention to tax reform, and his speech at Heritage was part of that. On October 12th, he said to us, "One thing we know is that ideas alone are not enough. If they were, we would have fixed our tax code by now. Bold reforms means taking on not just the status quo itself, but the people who defend it, who will stop at nothing to keep the system rigged." That was the attitude that the official legislative effort to enact tax reform was kicked off with at the Heritage Foundation. And lastly, President Trump came to this audience a year ago. Some of you were here for that. In this hotel, President Trump said, "The Great Heritage Foundation has been at the center of several incredible tax cuts in American history." A little later on in the speech, he said, "The Heritage Foundation can once again help make history by helping to take this incredible idea, this proven idea, this tax cut, and making it a reality for millions of patriotic Americans." He said that on October 27th, 2017. On November 2nd, Kevin Brady introduced the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The Ways and Means Committee reported that bill on November 13th. On November 16th, it passed the House. On December 2nd, it passed the Senate. And just in time for Christmas, as President Trump had predicted in his speech to this audience on December 22nd, 2017, President Trump signed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act into law. But what we're going to talk about on this panel is the second validation that I spoke about in the introduction, that those tax cuts are driving the economy, that the policy recommendations that we're making, that you're helping to make at the Heritage Foundation are working. They are part of the success story of the economy, and millions and millions and millions of families are benefiting from it. Over 10 years, the average family of four is going to see an increase in take-home pay of $45,000. Just close your eyes for a minute and think about that family of four. There are millions of them, and we made a difference in their life and a difference in the economy, all thanks to this success story. I'm going to turn it over now to Norbert Michel. Norbert is the director of the Center for Data Analysis at the Heritage Foundation. Norbert's been with us at Heritage since 2013. Before that, and this will be a recurring theme, Norbert did a stint at Heritage and CDA between 2002 and 2005. He's written 2 books, The Case Against Dodd-Frank and Prosperity Unleashed, Smarter Financial Regulation. In the interim, between 2005 and rejoining Heritage in 2013, Norbert was a college professor. He also did the kind of work he's doing at the Center for Data Analysis, modeling economic things at an energy company called Entergy, where he built a logistic regression model to save that company money. The types of models that big, major industries are running in the private sector, Norbert's helped leading those models here at the Heritage Foundation at CDA. Norbert's going to talk us through some of the really great work that was done in analyzing the TCJA after the fact. And when he's done, I'm going to come and tell you the reaction that members of Congress had to this great work that he's going to tell you about. Norbert?
Thank you, Tommy. So we are very excited about what we've been able to do at Heritage in the last couple of years. We have, as you probably are aware, we have analyzed different tax cuts at different points of time at Heritage. However, this is the first time that we were able to do this with our own in-house models. In other words, all of the analysis that we're going to look at right now and the numbers that Tommy's talking about, we did all of that with models that we developed at Heritage. They're ours. They're not ones that we bought off the shelf. All of this was created in-house. And what we did was put together not just a national level, but a state, and not just a state-by-state level, but a congressional district level analysis where we could see the average tax cut for 2018 for the average taxpayer, as well as for the typical family of four. And this is our website we're going to look at in a second here. And also the 10-year income, the 10-year increase in income for those same groups. And what we've shown is that these tax cuts from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act are very widespread. The average filer in every state and every district gets a cut. No matter what some of the rhetoric you might hear on the left is, everybody's getting a cut. So we thought that it was important to put something like this out, especially leading up to this next cycle of elections where obviously there's a threat to roll back some of those tax cuts. So this analysis that we'll look at here shows just how important it is to keep these in place. And if we go to the map here we go. So all of the analysis was compiled, it was compiled and then fed into this little handy map. And when you hover over, anybody can go here, taxesandjobs.com. You hover over any state, you get a little pop-up, and it will show you the average tax cut in 2018 and the average increase in take-home pay over the next 10 years, which was done with our dynamic models. And when we click on a state, and who wants to give me a good state? Texas. I heard California clearly. Let's do California. When you click on California, you'll get, and we scroll down, you'll get each congressional district in California. And as you go further down, so there's some summary information, and then you can click on any district you like. We'll go with Pelosi. known as the crumb. Okay, so you'll see this for every single district that you could go on. This is what you'll get. But you'll get the average tax cut in 2018, the average decrease in income tax as a percentage, as well as the increase in take-home pay over the next 10 years, and the take-home pay increase in 10 years for the family of 4. So it's the 40,000 is for the average filer, the 73 is for the family of 4. And these numbers are obviously quite large in dollar terms. And one thing that I'll point out here, because we did California, and I kind of had this in the back of my mind when I heard California, what you find across the nation is that the districts with higher income, they have a larger dollar amount in these cuts, but it's a smaller percentage relative to the lower income districts who pay if you look at their cut, it's a larger share of their income. So these guys have, say, a 9.2% decrease, whereas somebody in New York who only paid a few $100s in taxes, went all the way to 0, gets a bigger percentage cut. So on a percentage cut basis, the people who are on the lower end of the income scale get a bigger cut, but you see numbers like this in the richer Nancy Pelosi crumb district. And if that's pretty much it, the website. There's also a full report here co-authored by Adam and some of our guys in the Center for Data Analysis. So you can go to the website, you can hover over any state, whichever state is yours, find your district, and you can see your numbers. And then also, before you get into that part, if you want to, you can click and download the full report. It's a Heritage Foundation backgrounder. And it will explain all the little pieces of the tax cut, all the little pieces of these benefits that you see across the nation. That's our analysis.
That is an incredible tool. Thank you very much. Every now and again at the Heritage Foundation, we hit an absolute home run. And taxesandjobs.com and the analysis behind it was that home run. I had the incredible experience a few months ago of taking this information to Capitol Hill, and I will never forget that experience. Every Wednesday, the Republican Study Committee, all of the members of the Republican Study Committee in the House of Representatives have lunch together in the Capitol, and we printed out every single district of the members of the Republican Study Committee. It was a stack of paper about that big. Every member had an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that had that information. Nancy Pelosi's $73,000 worth of crumbs. We had it individualized, their name, their district, a picture of their state, a picture of their district, and then how it applied to their state. And we gave it to each and every one of them. And this is a meeting, they're sitting down, they're having lunch, they're in the middle of a busy lunch day, everybody's passing out papers, it's a big shuffle, you know what that kind of scene is like. But without fail, each and every one of those members, you would slide that piece of paper in front of them, and you could kind of tell, oh, okay, here's more paper for me to bring back to my staff. And then they would glance at it, and then they would take a closer look. And then they would see, this got my name on it. This is personalized. This is about my district. This is about the tax cuts. Wow, I can really use this. And then their eyes would light up, and they would look up from the paper, and they would say, who gave that to me? And then they would see that it was the Heritage Foundation, and they'd get this big smile on their face that said, thank you. It was an incredible experience. Over and over and over again, with 50 or 60 members, we gave them that personalized information, and we watched how their mind lit up as they understood how powerful this information would be for them. I think when we enact Tax Reform 2.0, when we make these tax cuts permanent, that's going to have a lot to do with it. Great job. I want to turn it over to Steve Moore. A while ago, I was talking about the president's speech here at President's Club a year ago. And you can tell when this president is being really sincere and really genuine. And in the opening moments of his speech to the Heritage Foundation, he took a second to recognize and acknowledge and thank from the bottom of his heart Steve Moore for the work that he had done. It was a big deal. You could tell he meant it. Steve is a distinguished visiting fellow here at the Heritage Foundation for the Project for Economic Growth. He's got so many accomplishments in his career that if I went through them, that would be what the panel is about. It's all online. Suffice it to say, he did a stint on the Wall Street Journal editorial board. He is the founder and creator of the Club for Growth. He was the Grover Herman Budgetary Fellow at the Heritage Foundation from 1984 to 1987, spent 25 years in the wilderness doing some other wonderful things, and rejoined the Heritage Foundation in 2014, and we're really privileged to have him. Steve, take it away.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. On my wall at the Heritage Foundation, in my desk, I have one of those old New Yorker cartoons, and it has a picture of two wolves baying at the moon. And one of the wolves turns to the other and says, "My question is, are we making an impact?" And I love that because it's a question we all ask ourselves. We couldn't have the Heritage Foundation without the incredible generosity of everyone in this room, so thank you so much for letting us do what we do. But it's oftentimes hard to, when we're in our business, it's hard to really gauge whether we're having an impact or are we just baying at the moon. But I think Tom, I think this is such a perfect example of Heritage at its best. The two guys I'm sitting next to have just done an amazing job on this. Adam and Norbert, you guys really did an amazing job in terms of getting this thing through. It was not easy, by the way. I mean, remember it was, December 21st, December 22nd, we still didn't have this thing through, and when we got those 50 votes, that was an amazing thing. So this really was Heritage at its best, and it only took us, 30 years to get this done, right? Because 1986 was the last time we had a major tax cut. So thank you all for that. So I want to you're going to talk about the tax cuts. I'm not going to talk too much about that. I'm going to talk more broadly about the economy and why we're seeing this incredible economic boom. And, I'll start by saying that, during the campaign, and by the way, another great thing about Heritage is, they gave me and many others a leave of absence at the end of 2016 so we could actually work on the campaign and get this great, great man, Donald Trump, elected president. And so when we were on the campaign, I used to have to debate all these liberal economists all the time about, whether Trump's policies would work. And, whether it was Paul Krugman or Larry Summers or the other members of the Harvard and Yale and Columbia economics faculty, every one of them said the same thing about Trump's policies, that if Trump was elected president, he would cause a second Great Depression. Paul Krugman, very famously, you all know this, the day after the election on MSNBC, if you want to have a good time, go to YouTube and watch this. He was asked when the stock market would recover, and Paul Krugman very famously said never. And then it went up by 40%. And so, he's the wrongest economist out there. Larry Summers, who's probably also one of the most prominent liberal economists, he was the chief economist for Obama, said that the best that the United States economy could do was 2% growth. This was called secular stagnation. It was the idea that this is the absolute best America could hope for in the 21st century, because after all, and then he said, it would be an absolute miracle if Donald Trump could get us to 4% growth. By the way, the numbers just came out this morning from the Atlanta Federal Reserve Board. I'll give you a sneak preview. Their forecast right now for third quarter GDP growth, 4.1%, on top of 4.2% last year. So this is amazing stuff. And my favorite, by the way, is former President Barack Obama, who said very famously in October of 2016, when Trump said he was going to bring back all these manufacturing jobs and get to 4% growth, Barack Obama said, how is he going to do that? With a magic wand? Well, maybe maybe Donald Trump has a magic wand because we've gotten there. So how did it happen? I'm going to I'll just show you a few quick charts to show you kind of what's going on. And this is an important story because it shows the triumph of our ideas over their ideas. If you think of the last 20 years, or at least the last decade, it's really been two presidents who've used diametrically opposite approaches to dealing with a slow growth economy. And you can see, some of you may have remembered this from the last time I spoke at this, but it's so worth repeating that, yes, we had a recovery under Barack Obama, no question about it. And it's been a long and durable recovery, but as you can see from that bottom line, it was an incredibly anemic recovery. And this was, in fact, you all know this was the weakest recovery we had from a recession since the Great Depression. And then if you look at the light blue line, that's just the average that's what you get on an average recovery, because we had 8 or 9 recessions since the end of World War II. So, you know, the Obama recovery was only half of what it was. And then, of course, if you compare this with Reagan, who, you know, cut taxes, cut regulations, got inflation under control. How many in this room, by the way, are old enough to remember 20% mortgage interest rates and 15% inflation under Jimmy Carter? And so the reason I know God smiles on America is that Jimmy Carter was not reelected president in 1980. But look, you can see those results, and this has led to a $3 trillion, what we call the growth gap. That is, we should have had a $3 trillion bigger GDP, except that Obama's policies were just holding back the economy. And you know what they were. They were the tax increases. They were the $830 billion economic stimulus plan that never created a single net new job. It was the tax increases on the rich. It was the 3 minimum wage increases. It was the Fed flushing all of this easy money into the economy with zero interest rate policies. It was $10 trillion of debt. This was the greatest experiment in Keynesian economics probably in world history of what happened under Obama, and you can see the results. We got this anemic recovery. By the way, the economy was not accelerating when Obama left office. It was decelerating. The last year Obama was in office, we had 1.5% economic growth, which is pathetic. That's pitiful. That's barely staying out of recession. Incidentally, you know, when these GDP numbers came out today, I was on CNN early I'm with fake news now, so none of you probably saw this, but, you know, this woman I was on with, she said, you know, of course the economy is doing well right now. This is the Obama effect, right? The Obama effect. You've heard. So I just said, you know, with all due respect, you know, my colleague here is correct. This is the Obama effect. It's the effect that Barack Obama is no longer president of the United States. That's why we're having this incredible growth. So this is the reason why. This is the reason why people voted for Trump, because the economy had not performed. Now, there's a big question about whether there's a Trump effect here, you know, because the left does say this is just a continuation of what happened to Obama. But if you look at these charts, you can see these are literally snapshots of what happened a week after the election. So you can see, you're looking at, the first one is the small business confidence. Look at what happened to small business confidence the week after the election. It just went through the roof. Look what happened to consumer confidence. It went through the roof and it's stayed high ever since. And then look at the last one is one of my favorite ones. The week before the election in 2016, Americans were asked, and this poll has been asked, you know, steadily for 25 years, how do you rate the economy? And at that time, and as it had been throughout the Obama presidency, 3 out of 10 Americans rated the economy as good or great. 3 out of 10. 3 out of 10. You know what that number is today? 7 out of 10. 7. You don't think there's a Trump effect here? I mean, that's an amazing jump. And so there's clearly a factor here. And incidentally, I would make the case that it's not any one thing Trump did. I mean, obviously, you're right that the tax cut has been a huge positive effect on the economy. But it's just getting getting rid of the community organizer and putting someone in office who knew something about business. And I think that's really why you saw the huge increase in confidence. This is my favorite cover of any magazine for the last 20 years. I just love this. I don't usually read Time magazine, but I saw this on the newsstand. I had to pick it up. This was a few months ago. And here's the funny thing about this. The left saw this as some kind of criticism of Trump, right? And these people are so stupid, they don't even get it, right? Yes, we are a wrecking crew. We're trying to dismantle government in Washington, right? That's what we're here for. And so I just love this. You know, they say, oh, how can we dismantle government? That's what the American people want. That's why, what was Donald Trump's closing line in the election? You all remember it, right? Drain the swamp. People want government dismantled. That's what Trump is doing with his deregulation policies. It's fantastic. Tariffs and trade, people ask me about this all the time. Obviously, we at the Heritage Foundation are very staunch free traders. I certainly am, and I know all our economists are as well. But I would say this, that Trump has a case here. That it is, when I never forget the first meeting that Larry Kudlow, by the way, how awesome it is it that the most important economist in the world today is Larry Kudlow at the White House? I mean, how fantastic is that? You know, and these are the numbers that the Trump administration put out. Larry and our friend Kevin Hassett put out. It is true that Trump would basically say, look, it's not a level playing field. We've cut our tariffs, but a lot of these other countries have not. And we started looking at the numbers, and lo and behold, it's true. It is true that our tariffs are relatively lower than any other country. I think Australia and Hong Kong have lower tariffs than we do, but many of our major trading partners are much higher than we are. So the point is, it is not a level playing field. And what we're pursuing, you know, at Heritage is this idea that I think is catching on with Trump. Larry Kudlow talks a lot about, which is 0 for 0. We'll cut our tariffs to 0 if you'll cut your tariffs to 0. He's got maybe a deal with the EU. He's got a pretty good deal with Canada and Mexico. I think he's going to get a deal with Japan and Korea. And then, of course, the big fight comes with China. And I think, you know, this is one man's opinion. I think China is become an adversary, not an ally of the United States. And that could take a while. But I'll tell you this. If Trump can get a deal with China where they stop stealing $300 billion of our intellectual property every year, where they open up their markets to U.S. products, what they should, because they've closed off their markets to us, you think this economy is strong now, you're going to see the biggest boom you ever saw. Trump is going to win on trade. I'm pretty certain of that. I don't know when it's coming, and I know this. Donald Trump, I know him very well. He is not going to back down to China. He is going to win this trade fight, and it's going to be a very positive thing. Okay, then quickly, you know, what else besides the deregulation it has been important? This is one of my favorite stories. I mean, the energy story in America is so amazing. This is the story of the decade, really. And it's the story of American ingenuity through fracking and horizontal drilling. How many in this room are in the energy business? I know there are many people who are. I mean, this is really an incredible story of American know-how and technology. It's not like God all of a sudden endowed America with this all oil and gas. It's been there for millions of years, right? It's just finally we figured out how to crack the code and get at the shale oil and gas. And look at that. The blue line is American production of oil and gas, and the red line is the amount that we are importing. And by the end of 2020, the United States of America, for the first time in 50 years, will be a net exporter of oil and gas. How awesome is that? I remember when we told Donald Trump, if you get government out of the way and let our energy producers do their thing, and by the way, that's oil and gas and coal. We have 600 years worth of coal. We ought to use our coal in America. This idea of shutting down coal is absolutely ridiculous. And we told Trump, look, if you just get the government off the back of these industries, we said, the United States of America can become energy independent. You know what he said to us? Not energy independence. I want American energy dominance. And we are very close to getting to that point. So that's a great story. By the way, just as an aside, you all saw this crazy climate change report came out last week. How many of you in this room know what country, of all the industrialized countries, the top 25 economies in the world, which country reduced its carbon emissions the most in 2017? United States of America. Nobody knows. I mean, you all know that because how many of you knew that, by the way? Most of you knew. Most Americans have no idea. The report that came out by the United Nations points to Trump and the United States as if we're the villains. We're reducing our carbon emissions. By the way, here's a great line, because I think, how many are with me on this? One of the greatest things Donald Trump was pulling the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord, which is the worst deal ever for the United States. Not one country, not one of those sanctimonious European and Asian countries, not one of them has hit even 75% of their targets. So that's an amazing thing. Thank you, Donald Trump, for getting us out of that. And then finally, I'll just kind of end with this, which you're going to talk about, but I'll just say the heart and soul of the tax bill was really cutting the business tax rate. And I'm just going to say on the way out here, I'm just going to end this. You can see those green pillars are the countries that we compete with, and you can see year after year, they were cutting their rates very sharply, right? Year after year after year, cutting those tax rates. We're the black line at the top, and you can see we did nothing for 25 years while Britain and Germany and France and Italy and China and Ireland, all these countries cutting their rates very sharply. We're at 40%, they're at 20%. And we basically said to Donald Trump, Larry Kudlow and I showed this very chart to Trump when we're presenting him with the tax plan, and we said, this is like a 20% Head Start program for every country we're competing with. Why would we do this? What country would have such a stupid policy? It's like economically imbecilic. And, you know, we showed this to Trump, and he looked at it, and he loves to look at pictures like this, and he said, yeah, this is a great chart. And we said, therefore, Donald, at that time we called him Donald, now of course we call him Mr. President, we said, we believe you should cut the corporate rate to 20%. And we sat back, and he sat back, thought about it, and said, no, that's not what I'm going to do. So where do you get this? You know, we're at 40, they're at 20. We got to get it down to 20. He said, no, not 20, 15. He said, I want 15. Now, this is a great story. And so we said, wait a minute, you know, that may have been the first time in 30 years that anyone has gotten to the right of Larry Kudlow and I on cutting tax rates, you know. So he said, Donald, if you want 15%, we'll sell 15%. Now, why is that story important? Because from that day in March of 2016 through December 22nd, 2017, which is the day that we finally got the agreement in the Senate to pass the bill, Trump was unrelenting. He never budged 1 inch. 15, 15, 15. Every meeting he was in, it has to be 15%. I'm not taking 1/10 of 1 percentage point above 15%. It has to be. In every congressional meeting, every public declaration, every speech he gave, every private meeting, 15, 15, 15, 15. Well, the last day, this is a great story, December 20th, 2017, we're over at the White House. We're waiting for Mitch McConnell to come in because they had their caucus meeting at the Senate to decide whether they could pass this bill. And whether they had the votes. And I'll never forget, Mitch McConnell comes in and he said, Mr. President, you know, I failed you. I'm so sorry. You know, we just had our caucus meeting, and I did everything I could to get you that 15% rate you wanted, you know, and I made every argument I could think of, and, you know, I just have to apologize to you. Mr. President, the best I could get is 20%. Would you take it? And he said, so I'll take it. Now, this is why this is such a great insight into Donald Trump. I am convinced, looking at it from, you know, a year and a half later, that Trump knew all along we were probably going to end up to 20%, right? But this guy is a master negotiator. If you want to understand Donald Trump, you have to read his book. What is the book? The Art of the Deal. This is one of the great negotiators. I am convinced to this day that if Donald Trump had taken Larry and my advice and started at 20%, we would have ended up at 25. There's no question in my mind. Thank you, Donald Trump, for sticking at 15%, getting the best pro-business, pro-growth tax cut in 30 years. Thank you very much.
I loved it when Steve called Krugman the wrongest economist of all times. By round of applause, should we nominate Steve Moore and Larry Kudlow as the rightest economists of all time? In just a few minutes, we're going to get to your questions. First, I'm going to introduce Adam Michel, and I'm going to ask him to respond to one of these questions as he does his remarks. Great baseball teams that go far in the playoffs. Some of you are baseball fans. I am. Almost all of them have one or two great additions before the trade deadline that make that huge difference in the playoffs. There's always a game or a series where that one or two player that they add just before the trade deadline makes all the difference. And whoever did that, whoever made the best additions, that's who's going to go on in the playoffs and to the World Series. Well, Adam Michel was our addition before this tax reform effort. He joined the Heritage Foundation as a policy analyst, having done stints at both CEI and Mercatus. In preparing for this panel, I was doing some research on tax reform. I was doing some research on heritage writing. And if you click on Adam Michel's bio page on heritage.org, everything he's written, commentary, reports, backgrounders, all of that is listed below his biography. And it reads like this epic timeline where every lie that is told about the tax reform bill, every myth that's out there from the left, Adam's in there punching back with hard-hitting commentary. I really encourage you to go take a look at everything he's written. Adam, one of the questions we've gotten from the crowd that's getting some upvotes here is, when can Americans expect genuine tax reform, not political tweaks to the current system? You're going to talk about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and also Tax Reform 2.0, and in that, can you address that question?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. It's a hard act to follow. I am really excited to be here with you all, and and Norbert shared with you the work that we've been doing to measure the impact of tax reform. And we've been doing a whole lot of work throughout Heritage, through the Daily Signal. They've been reporting on the good news of tax reform. We've been promoting the taxcutsandjobs.com. And what we've been doing is we've been traveling around the United States to take this message to folks where they live. There's any number of myths, as Tommy pointed out, out there about tax reform. And we've been at county fairs. We've held events with local think tanks in Utah, in North Carolina, and what we tend to see is people will walk by our booth or stop by and say, no, that's not me. I didn't get a tax cut. And so what we have to do is push back on that. They've been lied to time and time again. They've heard that this is just a tax cut for the rich. If they're poor, they didn't get a tax cut. If they're retired, they didn't get a tax cut. And all of that is just simply not true. The rates came down across the board. The standard deduction was doubled. The child tax credit was doubled. And that's all just the individual side of the tax reform. And we found through the study that Norbert highlighted that the majority of Americans get a tax cut. The average taxpayers in every single congressional district get a tax cut. But then there's this whole economic piece that Steve was talking about, that business investment in the United States is at levels we haven't seen in a long time. We have more jobs available right now than people looking for them for the first time ever. Businesses are in the longest running stretch of adding new jobs to the economy, and that's more than just a tax cut of money in your pocket. That economic opportunity is tremendous. That additional job that a family can now get for a family that was pushed out of the job market entirely before as part of the last recession. Getting that new job is not just a 3% increase in your wages. That's a 100% increase in the amount of money coming into your family, and that's no small thing to sneeze at. So. That's the message we've been taking around the country. We've been taking it to members' offices and pushing back. I think Tax Reform 2.0 is really exciting as well, hitting on that. The thing that on top of making all the tax cuts permanent we talked about, the thing that I'm most excited about are universal savings accounts, which I think are a real structural reform to the tax code, giving folks access to retirement savings like you do in your 401k or your IRA, but for any purpose you want. So there's no penalties for taking it out early. It's saving for the next time your car breaks down or needing to replace your refrigerator, helping your kids go to school. And I think getting a savings vehicle like that in the tax code can really transform the way that Americans think about saving and investing and get us away from this idea of an income tax altogether. So I will leave it there.
Can you touch on Tax Reform 2.0 a little bit in terms of how it's gone so far in this Congress and what you expect next year?
Yeah, so Tax Reform 2.0 is there's two pieces of it. One is this savings component, and the other piece is making the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act permanent. Most of the tax cuts that Norbert was highlighting expire after 2025. So in 2026, taxes go back up. And the numbers that Norbert reported over 10 years, that assumes that taxes go back up. So all those numbers are even larger if we can get Tax Reform 2.0 and all the tax cuts to be made permanent. The House passed Tax Reform 2.0, the whole package, made it all the way out of the House and is now waiting for the Senate to act. The Senate is a little more tricky, but the American people have this money in their pocket. And if Congress doesn't make the tax cuts permanent, make all of this good economic news continue, I think you'll see an upswell of people just requiring them to do it. Right now you see news stories, it wasn't me, I didn't get the money. As soon as someone sees sees the threat of their taxes going back up, I think the narrative will be very different. And this is certainly a tax cut for Americans across the board. So I'm optimistic that we'll get that done.
Well, thank you. Three great presentations from great panelists this morning. We've got a full 30 minutes for questions from the audience. We're going to take questions in two different ways. Some of you have already been participating in the first way. On the app, you're able to submit questions. I've got them here on this iPad, and we will read through those. I'm going to go ahead and take care of one right off the bat. The question comes from the audience. Are Adam and Norbert brothers? No, they're just good buddies. They're just good buddies with the same last name. So we've already got one question out of the way there. The most liked question on here, I think, is a good one. And then in a minute, we're gonna let the panelists answer this question. We also have live mics in the audience. If you have a question, raise your hand. They will bring you a mic, and I'll call on you. But let's start with one that came in on the app. The front page of the Wall Street Journal today said the deficit swells as tax cuts take bite. Let's discuss that a little bit. Obviously, the deficit is growing year to year. It's my belief that we don't have a taxing problem that's driving the deficit. We have a spending problem that's driving the deficit. Congress cannot help themselves but go up hundreds of billions of dollars a year, and I think that's what's driving the deficit. But let me turn to Steve to take on that question a little bit in terms of what the relationship between the tax cuts and the deficit are, and how does economic growth play a role?
So I have this book that's coming out in 3 weeks that I wrote with Art Laffer called Trumponomics, an inside view to Trump's America First policy, and I hoped it was going to be here in time for this meeting, but it isn't, but we'll get copies of it to everyone. But one of the things we talk about in the book is, what is the central theme of what Trump is after on the economy? Because Trump is not, he's not an ideological conservative the way Ronald Reagan was. He's a businessman. I describe him as kind of a common sense conservative. And the reason I bring that up is one of the things that we believe that really drives Trump, and this is something Larry and I really tried to hammer Trump on, and he didn't need a lot of pushing on this, was economic growth. Get the economic growth rate up, because when you get a faster growing economy, every other problem is easier to solve. And so now we have evidence of that in terms of what's happening with the deficit. Now look, we got a lousy deficit number in today, but here's the point. If you look at the increase in the economic growth that we've seen just since the tax cut passed, because I made the point, we grew at 4.2% in the second quarter, 4.1% in the third quarter is the latest estimate. I mean, those are gigantic numbers. I mean, Obama never got us to 3% in 8 years. So, the difference between 1.5% growth and 4% growth is like the difference between going 15 miles an hour down the highway in a car and 40 miles an hour down the highway. Now, why does that matter with respect to the deficit? If you look at the increase in the growth rate, the CBO has just put out their latest forecast. They have increased over the next decade their forecast for the economic growth by $6 trillion. $6 trillion. That's just based on when you get a big bump up in growth like we have, that affects the size of the economy in every future year. So $6 trillion, the government gets, 18% of GDP, Feds, something like that? So 18% of $6 trillion is like $1.1 trillion. Ladies and gentlemen, we've already paid for 2/3 of the tax cut. Think of that. The tax cut was costed out at $1.5 trillion. We've already got $1.1 trillion additional revenue. So that's the first thing, is that the increased economic growth is going to get us a lot more revenues. But where we're totally falling apart right now, and I blame Romina for this, Paul. No, I'm just kidding. Romina is such a superstar in the budget. We can't get either party to cut spending. It's just a terrible thing. I mean, it is an awful thing. Romina puts out these awesome budgets. Trump basically, Trump's budget was basically Romina's budget, as you know, and it's a great budget, but Congress, Congress just completely ignored it. They spent more money on the military, and they spent more money on domestic programs, and we better get those caps back, or we're going to be in big trouble.
That's absolutely right. Tax reform, tax cuts have been the bright spot of the 115th Congress, and the increased spending has been the dark spot. It's been a real disappointment. Fiscal conservatives are not in the majority, apparently, in the United States Congress, and we need to do better about that. A debt crisis is coming, and they need to hear about it. Let's move on to a question from the audience back there.
Steve, can you hear me? How likely is the tax reform 2.0 to pass? Do we need 60 votes in the Senate or a simple majority?
He's pointing at me, so I'll...
You know these rules better than I do.
Yeah, so we do need, if it goes through regular order, we need 60 votes in the Senate. There is the possibility of attaching it to reconciliation like they did the first time around. It's to be determined whether they'll choose to use reconciliation for that. I mean, my hope is that we get both spending reform and tax reform paired together through a reconciliation vehicle like we were fighting for the first time around, so we can bring spending in line with revenues and really bring that, address the underlying problem, which is the ballooning spending.
So let me just add one thing to that, which is, look, I think most people in this room, I mean, how many of you are in favor of a flat tax? Raise your hand. I mean, you know, why isn't how many of you are the fair tax? Look, I mean, the flat tax is the way to go. Get the rates down as low as possible. Get rid of all the crap and the loopholes and the stuff in the tax code. And we did some of that in this bill. We did the best we could in terms of getting rid of these loopholes and ridiculous deductions. One of the things I was so disappointed at, we didn't get rid of something called the production tax credit, which goes to the solar and wind industry. Did you know every time $1 of wind and solar power is sold, the federal taxpayer pays 30 cents of that? A 30% credit. No other industry in America gets that. We couldn't get rid of that. But my point is, one of the things we did that was, I think, monumentally important for major tax reform, where we really do a Steve Forbes-style flat tax, is we doubled the standard deduction. And that means that it used to be about more than half of Americans actually itemize their deductions on their tax codes, on their tax forms. You know what that number is going to be in 2018 and 2019 and 2020? Only 1 out of 10. Only 1 out of 10. So we are taking away the constituency, if you follow what I'm saying. Now the constituency for all these remaining loopholes, whether it's the mortgage deduction, the charitable deduction, the production tax credit, all this other stuff, there's not a big constituency for it anymore. And so I'm really hopeful sometime in the next 4 or 5 years we could actually see, look, I love what Adam's talking about in terms of 2.0, but ultimately we want to just clean out the stables of the entire tax system and go back to something very simple and fair and pro-growth like a flat tax.
You know, Adam said we do need 60 votes to pass tax reform 2.0 in the Senate, but I don't want that to don't let that affect your degree of optimism about the possibility of this. In 2017, when these tax cuts were passing, not one Democrat voted for them, and I can promise you every last one of them regrets it.
That's right.
Because, like I said in the intro, it is a good news story. Nobody doesn't want their taxes cut, and I bet you now that it has passed, all those bonuses and raises that went out in the immediate aftermath of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passing, those Democrats that voted no, they wanted a piece of that, and they may change their voting behavior when we bring it back next Congress. Let's go to another question from the audience. We've had a question down here. Yes, sir, in the red tie.
Good morning, Dick Spear. Steve, this is primarily to you. I recall seeing a story, I believe it was late 15, early 16, and the news was touting the labor participation rate for Barack Obama, equal to that of Ronald Reagan. So I recall going in and looking at labor statistics, and the rate was equal, in fact, for the term. The difference was we saw that Reagan's went up the entire time he was in office, and Barack Obama's went down the entire time he was in office. Those are statistics, like many of the slides you showed this morning, that most of America never sees. What do we do to get these pictorial views to the American people to really educate them on conservative economics?
Whew, that's a tough one. Let me actually just talk for a minute about labor force participation, because people always ask me, can Trump keep up this 4% growth path? And look, I think we could see 4 or 5 or 6 more quarters of 4% growth, which would be phenomenal. What is the biggest constraint right now on that growth? It's we don't have the labor force growth. And one of the things that even I'm surprised at, we're starting to see a small tick up in labor force participation rate. By the way, you're right, it went straight down under Obama. That's one of the reasons, we used to joke when I was at the Wall Street Journal, eventually, Obama's going to get to 0 unemployment because no American's going to be working, right? That's why some of these statistics make no sense. All these people are dropping out of the workforce. And so we need to find policies. This is something we're working on at Heritage. How do we get more Americans to the workforce? Cutting tax rates certainly helps because it increases the reward to work. But one of the things we're working very diligently on that I think is one of the most important, when you think about what are the next big steps, welfare reform. Every single person who gets food stamps, Medicaid, public housing assistance, AFDC, any of these programs, if you are able-bodied, you should have to work, right? I mean, you should have to work for and this is not, we need all hands on deck, right? We need every American who can work and wants to work to get into a job. And by the way, I'm not saying this. People say, oh, conservatives are so hard-hearted, they're so merciless. No, the best thing you can do to somebody on welfare is get them a job, get them a paycheck, and people will rise up the ladder. So that's a huge one. And then I'll just mention one other thing. I love this Trump proposal, and I'll do a little nod to Obama. I think he was right about this. We need more apprenticeship programs. We need more junior colleges. We need more technical schools. This idea that everybody has to go, to college for 4 years and come out with a sociology degree. I mean, what possible positive benefit is that? My son goes to Northwestern. It's $55,000 a year. He'd be better off playing computer games for 4 years than going to Northwestern. And so, anyway, don't get me started on that.
I'm going to go to a question here from the app, and I'm going to let all three panelists have a shot at it because it's a major news story this week. Rising interest rates are popping up. That's one of the things that comes with positive economic growth. What effect will that have on future growth and on the economy at large? Norbert, go ahead.
Well, you actually nailed it at part of that with part of your response right there. It is sort of. The interest rate is also a reflection of the rate of return on capital and rate of return on economic activity. So the fact that interest rates are going up reflects that we're doing better.
That's true.
It's not a fact that as interest rates go up, it's going to kill the economy. So I would dispel that myth, and I do try to dispel that myth at every chance I get.
Steve?
So I just added, look, you're absolutely right. We used to tell Trump that, look, if you get that economy growing at 3.5%, 4%, those interest rates are going to go up because exactly like you said, the rate of return is going to go up.
And
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no.
So I think people have the 70s and the Carter era, conflating these things. If the interest rates are going up because the rate of inflation is going up, that's a different story. If you see inflation rates at 5, 6, 7% and then rates going up to match that, that's a problem. But that's not what we see right now, really.
Yeah, I agree with that totally, and I think Trump's getting a lot of, taking a lot of complaints from people saying he shouldn't criticize the Fed. Why not? Why shouldn't the president criticize the Fed, especially when they're, there's this idea among a lot of professional economists that somehow these people live in some kind of temple and they're oracles from God that know the answer to, and it's just not true.
I criticize the Fed all the time.
Now this is an oracle from God, right? But no, these people at the Fed, they don't know what they're doing. And so look, if they knew what they were doing, we wouldn't have had 20% mortgage interest rates in the 70s. We wouldn't have 15% inflation. If they knew what they were doing, we wouldn't have had the financial collapse in 2006 and 7 and 8. And people like Norbert were out there in the Wall Street Journal editorial page, day after day, were warning about these policies, that they were creating a financial bubble, and the Fed was asleep at the switch. My only point is that the idea that somehow these people have all the answers, and Trump should criticize them when they're wrong. Look, I don't have a problem with these interest rate rises now. What I do have a problem with is this idea that's been instilled in these Fed economists for 40 years, because they're all Keynesians, who believe somehow there's something called overheating of an economy. Nonsense. There's no such thing as overheating. They say the economy's overheating at 4%. Did you know we had quarters under Ronald Reagan? We had 8.5% growth. The economy can grow much faster than it is. And this idea that that's going to cause inflation is ridiculous. As Art Laffer says so profoundly, and it's such a simple concept, this is why economics is so simple, right? If the economy produces more apples, what happens to the price of apples? Does it go up or down? It goes down. Increase in production leads to lower prices, not higher prices. Okay, I'm done. But I mean, I just get so sick of these people.
Right, no, you're right.
All right, let's go to a question now from the audience. We've got one right over here. Yes, sir.
Oh, hi. I live in Arlington, so I guess that makes me a pseudo swamp creature automatically. I just wondered, how firm do you think? Because I do my own taxes, and I notice the personal exemption's gone. Unfortunately, living in Arlington, SALT affects me, and the management fees that were miscellaneous on the Schedule A, they're going to be gone. So I'm wondering how, given congressmen, being politicians, how firm do you think that those things that are now gone are going to stay gone into the future?
Well, this is one of the things that Adam has addressed in his many commentaries in terms of battling back against the myths about tax reform in the left. Adam, you want to take that about SALT?
Yeah, so we hear this narrative that California, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Arlington, these people aren't getting tax cuts because the SALT deduction was capped because of these other changes, and that's just simply not what we see. We have a representative sample of 150,000 actual tax returns from the IRS that we ran through our model. We ran the 1040 on it before and after tax reform, and we find 95% of Americans across the country get tax cuts. And then that's reflected in these dollar value tax cut numbers that we were talking about earlier. And so the good news is all around, and the capping of the SALT deduction in particular has all of these other incredibly important benefits. It removes the subsidy that used to be in effect, where people in Texas, in Tennessee, were subsidizing to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars in some case, high taxes in California, New York, New Jersey. And we've actually seen states respond to this incentive since the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act went into effect. There's been new organizations sprout up in New Jersey, in New York, and California to lower state-level property taxes, to lower income taxes in those states. And so what we see is removing the federal subsidy for high taxes in these states is producing benefits not only across the economy, not only at the federal level, but at the state level as well. So that's, I think, one of the really unsung stories of the success of the tax reform.
Yeah, I totally agree with Adam on this. I think this was one of the gems of the tax bill. Now look, how many of you, raise your hand if you live in California. Raise your hand if you live in New York. Raise your hand if you live in Illinois. Raise your hand if you live in Connecticut. Move! Just move, right? I mean, why do you put up with these high tax rates? Move to Tennessee, move to New Hampshire, move to Florida. I mean, it's happening day after day. And Adam's right. If those states like California and Illinois and New York and New Jersey don't cut their tax rates, people will move. There will be a migration. That's what makes our federalist system so great, right? You can, and if you want to, if you're an economic masochist and you want to live in California, New York, I mean, be my guest. But why should people in Texas and Florida and Tennessee have to pay higher taxes for lousy services in those states? And, right, who lives in Texas? Who lives in Florida? Who lives in, you're paying more taxes. And by the way, there's no evidence. We've done a lot of research on this at Heritage. Just because, New York has twice the government spending at the state and local level per person that Tennessee does. Anybody here from Tennessee? One or two of them? They spend twice as much per capita on government, state and local level, in New York and Tennessee, and yet virtually every public service is better in Tennessee than in New York, right? So that tells you a lot. Spending more money on these things doesn't lead to better public services.
Go ahead.
I mean, in terms of those things staying gone, I mean, I think we always have to be vigilant. I think as the economy continues to do well, it's probably a little bit safer. But with the deficit as large as it is, I'm not trying to say vote or don't vote. I'm just saying if the House flipped, for example, and the economy started doing worse, I think there'd be a much higher danger with the deficit the way it is that some of those things will disappear. Because they won't. We all know they won't want to cut spending.
One of the things that you hear out there is literally repeal Trump's tax cut. That's one of the mantras that we keep hearing from the left, and that if you look at the benefits here, if you think about what's at stake going forward, it's not just whether or not these will expire. It's whether or not they're repealed wholesale. We actually have some research coming out that extends the research that Norbert highlighted, looking at what repeal, if Congress repealed these tax cuts next Congress, what that looks like, how much lower folks' take-home pay would be, and it's tremendous. It's tens of thousands of dollars for an individual filer. For a family of four, it's even larger that's at stake here, so it's more than just can we make this permanent? Can we keep what we got, and how can we keep the economy moving in the direction that Steve has been talking about today?
When people oppose our policies, they look for wedges to separate conservatives from one another. SALT was a contentious piece of tax reform when it passed. And when the tax reform 2.0 package was coming together inside the Congress, and they were drafting legislation. Those who opposed the tax cuts sought to get members from the SALT states to change their vote. Members who had voted in favor of tax reform, of the TCJA, to say, no, because of SALT, I won't be able to vote for tax reform 2.0. The majority whip staff, the majority whip counts the votes in the House, and the majority whip staff told me not one member had changed their vote between the TCJA and tax reform 2.0 over SALT. So that's great news in terms of keeping it together. We're going to go to a question from the audience. Do you have one back there? Yes?
Sorry. I just had a knee operation. I think for Steve. I believe, I think most of us probably in this room believe, and I'm from Maryland, that both the welfare system and our tax system is currently anti-family and anti-marriage. The tax system doesn't give any benefits at all to married people, and married people, both spouses, usually work, and because their salaries are added up, they're paying more money. I'm no longer married, I'm a widow, so I have no stake in this game, but I believe that it is for the benefit of society to be pro-marriage and pro-family, and unfortunately, most governments at every level are not. So what do you say about that?
Well, but one of the things in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is they removed many of the marriage penalties at the sort of bottom end of the distribution. But we didn't get everything we wanted in tax reform, so we need to come back for more. There are some marriage penalties in the top income brackets, and so it's about coming back and flattening all that out. Whether it's a flat tax or just moving incrementally in that direction, there's always more to be done. And I mean, just tax rates coming down across the board helps families of every makeup. And so I think that's a good goal to lower tax rates and equalize rates across the board.
Hey, look, you're a great economist, ma'am, because, you know, look, the statistics are so clear about this, that intact families with two parents, they're not in poverty, right? You want to get out of poverty, get married and stay married. It's really that simple. I mean, marriage is one of the greatest anti-poverty programs ever invented. It really is.
All right. This may or may not be the last question, depending on how long it is. We're going to go to you in the back. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Heritage was very instrumental in the choices for Supreme Court, and that certainly has long-term effects on everyone. Was Heritage making any overtures for choices to lead the Fed? As far as the head of the Fed, you know, you're saying, well, we have Keynesians in the Fed. Why?
I can answer that. Yeah, no, so yes, it wasn't as public, and we don't, I'm not sure. I can't speak for what happened with the Supreme Court nominee list and all that stuff. I honestly don't know. But in the department that I'm in, we don't say anything about specific nominees in public. However, behind the scenes, we've definitely, and through transition, we definitely put forward a lot of names. Those names didn't make it on.
Yeah. You mean on the Fed list?
Onto the Fed, yeah, onto the Fed. Now, I mean, I didn't work in the White House, so I don't, I mean, I know that there are certain people there, and I'm not trying to call anybody out, but there are certain people there that have a very status quo, keep the markets calm sort of approach. And those types of people don't want to put anybody on the Fed who has a very different view. The last nominee, the most recent nominee is Nellie Lang, who is a very nice woman, a capable economist as far as those kinds of things go. But she was in the Obama administration, and she literally headed the effort to put the Dodd-Frank rules together.
So why don't we just
it's mind-boggling why they would put her on. Yeah, I volunteered, but I didn't get on either.
You'd be 10 times better.
Well, there are some key appointments and key individuals inside of the Trump administration in terms of the economy that certainly Heritage had a lot to do with. Certainly some key individuals, some friends of Steve Moore who are in high places these days. Heritage
So Tom,
alumni.
can I tell one just
Please.
2-minute story, because I think it really encapsulates the whole, what all of us did and why this tax bill is so important. And, you know, I was in Dallas about 3 weeks ago, and I was walking down the street, and this Hispanic woman was walking the other way, and she's kind of looking at me as we walked by, and she kind of grabbed me by the shoulder as I walked by, and she said something like, are you the guy I see talking about economics or something on TV? And I said, no, that wasn't me. That was no, but I mean, you know, I was a little worried. I don't like to get into arguments with people, you know. But she, you know, so I said, but she seemed pretty nice, and so I just said, yeah, that was probably me. And she said, you work with, you know, with Donald Trump, didn't you, on this campaign? I said, yeah, I was. And she said, I'm ready for her to slug me or something like that. And she said, I just want to shake your hand. You know, and I thought, wow. And she was, looked like she was in her mid-30s. She said she was from Guatemala. And she said, I did not vote for Donald Trump. But she said, I just got a $1,600 bonus from my employer. And it got me right here. I mean, it's exactly what you're talking about, right? And she said, tell Donald Trump thank you. And, you know, that's what this was all about. This was not about helping rich people. I'm like, well, we're all for people getting rich. That's what America's about. The left characterized this as some kind of big, you know, giveaway to the rich. This was always about helping lower and middle income people climb up the economic ladder. And I guarantee you, by the way, and the other thing this lady said is, she said, for the first time in 5 years, I'll be able to take a vacation, you know. And that's what this was all about. It was helping people at the bottom and in the middle class rise up. And that's why this tax cut was so critically important. It really would not have happened without Heritage. I am absolutely 100% convinced of that. So.
Well, what a great place to end our panel. Thank you so much for your engagement and your thoughtful questions today, but more importantly, thank you for your support of the Heritage Foundation that makes the work that these gentlemen do as impactful as it is. From us to you, thank you very much.
Thank you.